Imagine being 11 years old and discovering that your entire world is about to crumble. Picture standing in the shadows of Windsor Castle's grand corridors, overhearing conversations that would terrify most adults. Now imagine that same 11-year-old girl making a decision so bold, so unprecedented, that would echo through the halls of Buckingham Palace for decades to come. This is not a fairy tale. This is not fiction. This is the untold story of Princess Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Windsor, who would one day become Queen Elizabeth II, and the secret order she gave to her personal guard that shocked the royal household to its core. What could drive a child, barely past her 10th birthday, to command grown men sworn to protect the crown? What danger lurked in the shadows of the royal family that required such drastic action? And why has this story remained buried in the palace archives for over 8 decades? The year was 1937. The British Empire stretched across the globe, but within the walls of the royal residences, a different kind of empire was crumbling. Young Elizabeth had just witnessed something that would change her understanding of power, loyalty, and the true cost of wearing a crown forever. What you're about to discover will challenge everything you thought you knew about the British royal family, and reveal how an 11-year-old princess became the mastermind behind one of the most closely guarded secrets in royal history. The morning of October 15th, 1937, started like any other at Royal Lodge, Windsor. Princess Elizabeth, barely 11 years old, was practicing her piano scales in the music room when she heard raised voices coming from her father's study. The thick oak doors could not completely muffle the heated discussion taking place inside, and curiosity got the better of the young princess. Elizabeth had always been different from other children her age. While her younger sister Margaret preferred games and pranks, Elizabeth found herself drawn to the serious conversations of adults. She had learned early that knowledge was power, and in the royal household, power meant survival. Creeping closer to the study door, Elizabeth pressed her ear against the cool wood. What she heard made her blood run cold. Her father, King George VI, was speaking in hushed, urgent tones to Commander Frederick Browning, the head of royal security. "The threats are becoming more specific," her father was saying. "They're not just targeting me anymore, Frederick. They want to hurt the children." Elizabeth's heart began to race. She had always known that being royal came with certain dangers, but hearing it spoken so plainly by her own father made it terrifyingly real. Commander Browning's voice was steady but grave. "Your Majesty, we've intercepted 3 separate communications in the past week. All mention Princess Elizabeth by name. They seem to believe that removing the heir would destabilize the monarchy more effectively than targeting you directly." The young princess felt her knees weaken. She gripped the doorframe to steady herself, trying to process what she was hearing. Someone wanted to hurt her, not because of anything she had done, but simply because of who she was born to be. "What do you recommend?" King George asked, and Elizabeth could hear the strain in his voice. "We need to increase security around both princesses immediately. I suggest assigning personal guards to them at all times, even within the palace grounds. And we should consider relocating them to somewhere more secure until we can neutralize these threats." Elizabeth had heard enough. She carefully backed away from the door, her mind racing with thoughts and fears she had never experienced before. But alongside the fear, something else was growing inside her, a fierce determination that would define her character for the rest of her life. That evening, as Elizabeth sat in her bedroom brushing her hair before bed, she made a decision that would shock everyone who knew her. She would not be a helpless princess waiting for others to protect her. She would take control of her own security and protect her family in ways that no one would expect. The next morning, Elizabeth approached Sergeant James Mitchell, a young guard who had recently been assigned to the royal household. Mitchell was different from the other guards. He was closer to her age, having joined the service at 17, and he had always treated her with respect rather than the condescending kindness most adults showed to royal children. "Sergeant Mitchell," Elizabeth said formally, finding him during his morning patrol of the gardens. "I need to speak with you about a matter of utmost importance." Mitchell was surprised by the princess's serious tone. At 11, Elizabeth already carried herself with the bearing of someone much older, but there was something different about her today, an intensity that made him take notice. "Of course, Your Royal Highness. How may I serve you?" Elizabeth looked around to ensure they were alone before speaking. "I know about the threats against my family. I overheard my father speaking with Commander Browning yesterday." Mitchell's face paled. Information about security threats was strictly classified, and the fact that the young princess had overheard such a conversation was deeply concerning. "Your Royal Highness, I think you should speak with your father about—" "No," Elizabeth interrupted firmly. "My father has enough to worry about running the kingdom. I will not add to his burden by letting him know I'm aware of the danger we're in. Instead, I want you to help me do something about it." Mitchell was taken aback by the princess's directness. "I'm not sure I understand, Your Royal Highness." Elizabeth stepped closer, lowering her voice to almost a whisper. "I want you to teach me how to protect myself and my sister. Not just the basic self-defense that my governess might approve of, but real protection. I want to learn how to fight, how to use weapons, and how to think like someone who wants to hurt us." The request was so unexpected and so inappropriate that Mitchell initially thought he had misheard her. "Your Royal Highness, I couldn't possibly—" "You can, and you will," Elizabeth said with authority that seemed impossible from someone so young. "Because if you don't, and something happens to Margaret or me, you'll have to live with knowing you could have prevented it." Mitchell stared at the 11-year-old princess, seeing something in her eyes that convinced him she was deadly serious. There was a steel in her gaze that reminded him of seasoned soldiers he had served with, men who had seen combat, and understood that survival sometimes required making difficult choices. "What exactly are you asking of me, Your Royal Highness?" Elizabeth had clearly thought this through carefully. "Every morning at dawn, before the household awakens, I want you to meet me in the old stables. You will teach me everything you know about defending myself and others. Hand-to-hand combat, weapons training, strategic thinking, everything a soldier learns. And Princess Margaret? Margaret is too young and too carefree for this kind of training. But I need to be able to protect her if the situation arises." Mitchell felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. What the princess was asking went against every protocol in the royal household. If he were discovered, he would certainly be dismissed and possibly face criminal charges. But there was something about Elizabeth's determination that convinced him she was right. "There would have to be conditions," he said finally. "First, absolute secrecy. No one can ever know about this training, not even your parents or sister. Second, you follow my instructions without question. And third, if I ever feel that this training is putting you in more danger than it's preventing, we stop immediately." Elizabeth nodded solemnly. "Agreed. One more thing, Your Royal Highness." "Why me? You could have approached Commander Browning or any of the senior guards." Elizabeth's answer revealed a wisdom far beyond her years. "Because you're young enough to understand that sometimes the old ways aren't sufficient for new threats. And because you see me as a person, not just a symbol to be protected." The next morning, as dawn broke over Windsor Castle, Princess Elizabeth made her way quietly through the corridors to the old stables. She wore riding clothes to avoid suspicion if anyone saw her, but her destination was not the horses. In a forgotten corner of the building, behind stacks of hay and old equipment, Sergeant Mitchell was waiting for her. "Are you certain about this, Your Royal Highness?" he asked one final time. Elizabeth's response was to remove her jacket and stand ready for instruction. "Teach me everything," she said simply. What followed over the next several weeks was unlike anything that had ever happened in the history of the British royal family. While the rest of the household went about their daily routines, assuming the young princess was safely occupied with her studies and leisure activities, Elizabeth was learning skills that would have shocked and horrified her parents. Mitchell started with basic physical conditioning and situational awareness. He taught her how to move silently, how to observe her surroundings for potential threats, and how to identify exit routes in any room she entered. Elizabeth proved to be an exceptional student, absorbing every lesson with intense focus and practicing relentlessly. The most important thing to remember, Mitchell told her during one of their sessions, is that your greatest weapon is your mind. Physical skills are important, but thinking strategically about threats and how to counter them will keep you alive when strength fails. Elizabeth nodded, filing away every word. She had already begun applying these lessons in her daily life, unconsciously scanning rooms when she entered them and noting the positions of guards and potential escape routes. As the weeks passed, Mitchell began to introduce more advanced concepts. He taught her basic knife work, explaining that a royal princess would always have access to dining utensils that could be used as weapons in an emergency. He showed her pressure points on the human body and how to disable an attacker quickly and quietly. Most importantly, he helped her develop what he called a tactical mindset, the ability to assess threats and respond appropriately without hesitation. "Your Royal Highness," Mitchell said during one particularly intense training session, "I need you to understand something. The skills I'm teaching you are designed to protect yourself and others in life or death situations. They should never be used unless absolutely necessary, and only when all other options have been exhausted." "I understand," Elizabeth replied, "but if that moment comes, I will be ready." Mitchell looked at the 11-year-old princess, noting how much she had changed in just a few short weeks. Her posture was different, more alert and confident. Her eyes constantly moved, taking in details that most people would miss. She had developed the bearing of someone who expected trouble and was prepared to handle it. The transformation was remarkable, but it also concerned him. Elizabeth was losing some of her childhood innocence, replacing it with a hardness that seemed inappropriate for someone so young. Yet he couldn't deny that she was becoming capable of protecting herself in ways that traditional royal security could never provide. One morning in November, their training took an unexpected turn. As Elizabeth practiced a series of defensive moves that Mitchell had taught her, they heard footsteps approaching the old stables. Both froze, knowing that discovery would mean the end of their secret arrangement. "Someone's coming," Mitchell whispered urgently. "You need to hide." But Elizabeth had already assessed the situation and made her decision. "No," she said quietly. "It's time to expand our operation." Mitchell looked at her in confusion until he saw who was approaching. Princess Margaret, Elizabeth's younger sister, was walking toward them with determination that mirrored her older sister's. "I know what you've been doing," Margaret announced as she reached them. "And I want to learn too." Elizabeth studied her sister carefully. Margaret was only 7 years old, but she had clearly been observing them for some time. The fact that she had managed to track their secret meetings without being detected showed that she might have more potential than Elizabeth had initially believed. "Margaret, this isn't a game," Elizabeth said seriously. "What we're doing here is dangerous and secret. If anyone finds out, Sergeant Mitchell could be sent to prison." Margaret's response surprised them both. "I know, but I also know that someone wants to hurt us, and I don't want to be helpless if they try." Elizabeth looked at Mitchell, who shrugged slightly. The decision was hers to make. "If you join us," Elizabeth told her sister, "you must follow the same rules I do. Complete secrecy, absolute obedience to Sergeant Mitchell's instructions, and total commitment to learning everything he teaches us." Margaret nodded solemnly. "I promise." And so their small circle expanded from 2 to 3. Mitchell found himself training both royal princesses in skills that their parents would have found unthinkable. But as the weeks passed, and the sisters proved themselves to be dedicated students, he began to see the wisdom in Elizabeth's original request. These two young girls were learning to take control of their own security in ways that no amount of traditional protection could provide. They were developing skills and mindsets that would serve them well not just as royals, but as leaders who might one day face challenges that required both strength and strategic thinking. By Christmas of 1937, Princess Elizabeth had been transformed from a sheltered royal child into something entirely new, a young woman who understood that true power came not from birthright, but from the ability to protect those you loved and the determination to never be a victim. The secret order she had given to Sergeant Mitchell had set in motion a chain of events that would influence her approach to leadership for the rest of her life. But this was only the beginning of a story that would challenge everything the royal family thought they knew about duty, protection, and the true meaning of service to the crown. The winter of 1937 brought more than just cold weather to the royal household. Intelligence reports continued to arrive daily, each more disturbing than the last. Elizabeth had become expert at reading the subtle changes in her father's demeanor, and she could see the strain was taking its toll on him. During their morning training session in early January, Sergeant Mitchell brought troubling news to the princesses. "Your Royal Highness," he said to Elizabeth, "I've been monitoring communications within the security detail, and there's something you need to know." Elizabeth paused in her practice of knife techniques, immediately alert. "What is it?" "There's been a breach in palace security. Someone on the inside has been passing information to the people making threats against your family." The revelation hit Elizabeth like a physical blow. The idea that someone they trusted, someone sworn to protect them, could be working against them was almost too terrible to comprehend. "Do they know who it is?" Margaret asked, her young face serious beyond her years. Mitchell shook his head. "Not yet, but Commander Browning is conducting a quiet investigation. The problem is, until they identify the traitor, no one in the security detail can be fully trusted." Elizabeth felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. "That means we're more vulnerable than ever. Our traditional security might actually be working against us." "Exactly," Mitchell confirmed, "which is why your training has become more important than we initially realized." Over the following weeks, Elizabeth threw herself into learning with even greater intensity. She mastered technique for detecting surveillance, learned to identify potential weapons in everyday objects, and developed an almost supernatural awareness of her surroundings. But more importantly, she began to think strategically about the larger problem facing her family. If they couldn't trust their own security detail, they needed to create an alternative protection network that operated outside normal channels. "Sergeant Mitchell," Elizabeth said during one of their February sessions, "I want you to help me recruit others." Mitchell looked puzzled. "Others, Your Royal Highness?" "Servants, stable hands, kitchen staff, people who are part of the household, but invisible to those who might want to hurt us. People who could watch and listen without being suspected." The idea was brilliant in its simplicity. The royal household employed hundreds of people in various capacities, most of whom moved through the palaces and castles without being noticed by security personnel or potential threats. They could serve as Elizabeth's eyes and ears in places where official guards might not be welcome. "It's dangerous," Mitchell warned. "If word gets out about what we're doing, it could be seen as undermining official security." "The official security has already been undermined," Elizabeth pointed out. "We're just creating a backup system." Mitchell had to admit the logic was sound. "Who did you have in mind?" Elizabeth had clearly given this considerable thought. "Mary Thompson, one of the kitchen maids. She's young, intelligent, and she's always been loyal to our family. Thomas Wright, who works in the stables. He knows every person who comes and goes from the property. And Sarah Collins, my personal maid's assistant. She has access to areas where even guards don't go." "What would you want them to do?" "Watch, listen, and report anything unusual directly to you. No one else. We create a communication system that bypasses all official channels." The plan Elizabeth outlined was sophisticated beyond her years. Each recruit would be given specific areas to monitor and particular things to watch for. They would report their observations using coded messages that appeared to be routine household communications. Most cleverly, Elizabeth proposed that they use the existing servant gossip network to their advantage. Servants naturally shared information about unusual events or suspicious behavior, but this network was usually dismissed by security personnel as unimportant chatter. "We'll turn their gossip into intelligence," Elizabeth explained. "And we'll do it in a way that looks completely natural." Within a month, Elizabeth had quietly recruited a network of 6 household staff members who agreed to serve as informal security monitors. Each believed they were helping to protect the royal family from unspecified threats, and none knew about the other's involvement. The system worked better than anyone could have anticipated. Within weeks, Elizabeth's network was providing information that official security had missed entirely. Mary Thompson reported that she had overheard 2 guards discussing patrol schedules in detail with someone she didn't recognize during a shift change. Thomas Wright noticed that certain visitors to the stables were asking unusually specific questions about the princess's riding schedules. Sarah Collins discovered that someone had been going through Elizabeth's personal belongings when she wasn't in her room. Each piece of information, by itself, might have seemed insignificant, but when Elizabeth analyzed them together, a pattern emerged that painted a disturbing picture. "Someone is building a detailed profile of our daily routines," she told Mitchell during one of their morning sessions. "They know when we eat, when we ride, when we study, and when we sleep. They're planning something specific." Mitchell realized that the 11-year-old princess had developed analytical skills that rivaled those of experienced intelligence officers. "What do you think they're planning?" Elizabeth had been thinking about this for days. "They're going to try to take one of us. Not to hurt us immediately, but to use us as leverage against my father. That's why they need to know our schedules so precisely. They're looking for a window of opportunity when we're predictable and vulnerable." The analysis proved to be frighteningly accurate. 3 days later, official intelligence intercepted a communication that confirmed plans to kidnap Princess Elizabeth during her weekly riding lesson in Windsor Great Park. But because Elizabeth's network had identified the threat in advance, she was able to turn the situation to their advantage. Instead of canceling the riding lesson, she convinced her parents and security detail to let her keep the appointment, with modifications that would allow them to catch the conspirators in the act. On the morning of the planned kidnapping attempt, Elizabeth rode out to Windsor Great Park as scheduled. But instead of her usual guards, she was secretly accompanied by Sergeant Mitchell and 2 trusted members of her household network, all disguised as groundskeepers. The kidnappers took the bait, believing they were dealing with a predictable royal child and her routine security detail. They had no idea they were walking into a trap set by their intended victim. When the attack came, Elizabeth was ready. She had practiced the scenario dozens of times with Mitchell, and when 3 men emerged from the woods to block her path, she didn't panic or wait for rescue. Instead, she executed a series of moves that her training had made automatic. She used her horse as both shield and weapon, directing the animal to knock one attacker off balance while she dismounted on the far side. Before the second attacker could reach her, she had drawn a riding crop modified with a weighted handle that Mitchell had prepared for her. The third attacker found himself facing not a terrified child, but a young woman who moved with the confidence of someone who had trained for exactly this situation. Elizabeth struck precisely at pressure points Mitchell had taught her, disabling her opponent without causing permanent injury. Within minutes, all 3 kidnappers were subdued, with Elizabeth herself playing a crucial role in their capture. When official security forces arrived, they found the conspirators already restrained and their 11-year-old target calmly brushing down her horse. The incident sent shockwaves through the royal household. King George and Queen Elizabeth were horrified to learn how close their daughter had come to danger, but they were also amazed by her composure and effectiveness in dealing with the threat. Commander Browning conducted extensive interviews trying to understand how Princess Elizabeth had been so well prepared for the attack. But Elizabeth had coached everyone involved in her network to give responses that made her preparedness seem like luck and natural instinct rather than the result of months of secret training. "She's always been remarkably composed under pressure," Sergeant Mitchell reported when questioned. "I believe her equestrian training gave her confidence in controlling the situation." The official report concluded that Princess Elizabeth had shown extraordinary courage and presence of mind in a dangerous situation, but It attributed her success to natural leadership abilities rather than specific preparation. Only Elizabeth Mitchell and her household network knew the truth, that the princess had not just survived an assassination attempt, but had played a key role in capturing those responsible. More importantly, the success of their operation proved that Elizabeth's unconventional approach to security was not just viable, but potentially superior to traditional methods. Her network had detected the threat before official intelligence, and her personal preparation had turned a potential tragedy into a victory. But the victory came with costs. The investigation into the kidnapping attempt revealed that the security breach had indeed come from within the official guard detail. A senior officer had been selling information about the royal family's movements to a group of political extremists who wanted to destabilize the monarchy. The revelation that their trust had been betrayed so completely changed something fundamental in Elizabeth's worldview. She realized that position and authority meant nothing if they weren't backed by personal capability and independent judgment. From that point forward, Elizabeth began to see herself not just as a princess to be protected, but as a leader responsible for protecting others. The training sessions with Mitchell evolved from defensive preparation to strategic planning for various contingencies. "Your Royal Highness," Mitchell said during one of their sessions in March, "you've learned everything I can teach you about personal protection. But I think you're ready for the next level." "What do you mean?" Mitchell had been thinking about this for weeks. "You've proven that you can defend yourself and others when necessary. Now you need to learn how to prevent situations from becoming dangerous in the first place. That means understanding intelligence gathering, threat assessment, and strategic planning on a larger scale." Elizabeth's eyes lit up with interest. This was exactly the kind of challenge she craved. "I want to learn everything," she said simply. "Then we need to expand your education beyond what I can provide. I know people, former military officers, intelligence specialists, individuals who served in the Great War, who could teach you things that no princess has ever learned before." The prospect was both exciting and daunting. Elizabeth realized that what Mitchell was proposing would take her even further from the traditional path of royal education and deeper into a world that few people her age could even imagine. But she also understood that the threats facing her family were unlike anything the monarchy had faced before. Traditional approaches had already proven inadequate. If she wanted to truly protect those she loved, she needed to be willing to learn from sources that other royals would never consider. "Make the arrangements," she told Mitchell, "but maintain absolute secrecy. No one can know that we're doing this." As spring arrived at Windsor Castle, Princess Elizabeth was preparing to embark on an educational journey that would transform her from a remarkably capable 11-year-old into something unprecedented in royal history, a future monarch trained in the arts of intelligence, strategy, and unconventional warfare. The secret order she had given to Sergeant Mitchell months earlier had grown into something far larger and more significant than either of them had initially imagined. But this was still only the beginning of a transformation that would ultimately reshape how the British monarchy understood its role in an increasingly dangerous world. The spring of 1938 marked a turning point not just in Princess Elizabeth's unconventional education, but in the very nature of royal security itself. Mitchell's contacts had proven to be exactly what Elizabeth needed, a collection of individuals whose expertise went far beyond traditional military training. Colonel James Harrison, a decorated intelligence officer from the Great War, became Elizabeth's instructor in strategic thinking and psychological warfare. Dr. Margaret Ashford, one of the few female intelligence operatives of her time, taught her about surveillance techniques and coded communications. Captain Thomas Bailey, a former special operations expert, introduced her to advanced reconnaissance and sabotage methods. Each instructor was told they were training a promising young recruit for potential government service, not the heir to the British throne. They knew her only as Miss Windsor, and they assumed she was a relative of minor nobility being prepared for some unspecified role in the intelligence services. The deception was necessary because what Elizabeth was learning would have been considered shocking and inappropriate for any member of the royal family, let alone an 11-year-old girl. But Elizabeth absorbed every lesson with the same intensity she had brought to her initial training with Mitchell. Colonel Harrison was particularly impressed with his young student's analytical abilities. "Miss Windsor," he said during one of their sessions, "you have an unusual gift for seeing patterns that others miss. Have you ever considered that intelligence work might be your calling?" Elizabeth smiled at the irony of the question. "I believe I'm already exactly where I need to be, sir." Under Dr. Ashford's tutelage, Elizabeth learned techniques that would have been familiar to professional spies. She mastered the art of reading people's microexpressions to detect deception, learned to create and maintain false identities, and develop skills in what Ashford called social engineering, the ability to manipulate situations and conversations to gather information. The most powerful weapon any intelligence operative possesses, Dr. Ashford explained, is the ability to make people want to tell you their secrets. Physical skills are important, but psychological techniques are what separate amateurs from professionals. Elizabeth proved to be exceptionally gifted at these psychological techniques. Her natural charisma and royal training in conversation made her particularly effective at encouraging people to reveal more than they intended. Captain Bailey's lessons were perhaps the most practical for Elizabeth's immediate situation. He taught her advanced surveillance detection, showing her how to identify when she was being watched and how to lose pursuers without appearing to do so deliberately. "The key," Bailey explained, "is to make your evasive actions look like normal behavior. If someone is following you, don't run. That alerts them that you're aware of surveillance. Instead, use routine activities as cover for changing your route and destination." Elizabeth practiced these techniques during her normal daily activities, turning routine walks through Windsor Castle into training exercises. She would deliberately take circuitous routes to her destinations, using reflective surfaces to monitor for surveillance, and employing what Bailey called natural camouflage, blending with groups of servants or guests to become effectively invisible. But the most significant development in Elizabeth's education came when Colonel Harrison introduced her to the concept of network building on a national scale. "Miss Windsor," he said during one of their May sessions, "you've demonstrated exceptional ability in creating and managing small intelligence networks. But have you ever considered what might be possible if such networks were expanded across the entire country?" Elizabeth's pulse quickened. She had indeed been thinking about exactly that possibility. "What do you mean, specifically?" Harrison outlined a theoretical framework that took Elizabeth's breath away with its scope and ambition. Imagine a network of ordinary citizens, shopkeepers, teachers, postal workers, factory employees, all trained in basic observation and reporting techniques. People who could monitor for suspicious activities in their communities and report anything unusual through secure channels. The idea was revolutionary. Instead of relying solely on professional intelligence services and law enforcement, this approach would create a civilian intelligence network that could detect threats at the grassroots level before they developed into serious dangers. Such a network could identify potential subversives, foreign agents, and criminal conspiracies before they had time to organize, Harrison continued. And because the network members would be ordinary citizens going about their daily lives, hostile forces would have no way to identify or neutralize them. Elizabeth realized immediately that what Harrison was describing could solve not just her family's security problems, but potentially transform how Britain defended itself against internal threats. "How would such a network be organized and controlled?" she asked. "That's the brilliant part," Harrison replied. "It wouldn't be controlled in any traditional sense. Each cell would operate independently, reporting to regional coordinators who would pass information up the chain. No single person would know enough to compromise the entire network, but the collective intelligence would be extraordinary." Elizabeth spent weeks thinking about Harrison's theoretical framework, but she was also developing practical plans for implementing something similar on a smaller scale. Her existing household network had proven so successful that she was confident the concept could be expanded. By summer of 1938, Elizabeth had begun quietly recruiting beyond the royal household. Using her various public appearances as opportunities for recruitment, she identified individuals who demonstrated the right combination of loyalty, intelligence, and discretion. A shopkeeper in Windsor who noticed and remembered every customer who entered his store. A postmistress who was naturally observant about unusual mail patterns. A schoolteacher who understood how to communicate with people of different backgrounds and education levels. Each recruitment was handled with extraordinary care. Elizabeth would engage potential recruits in seemingly casual conversations during public events, assessing their suitability over multiple interactions before making any direct approach. When she did recruit someone, she never revealed her ultimate identity. To her network members, she was simply Miss Elizabeth, a young woman working for unspecified government interests who needed reliable people to help monitor for suspicious activities in their communities. The recruitment process itself was a masterpiece of psychological manipulation that would have impressed her instructors. Elizabeth would first establish personal rapport with potential recruits, then gradually introduce the idea that they could serve their country in important ways. There are people who want to hurt Britain and British families, she would explain. Good citizens like yourself are our first line of defense against these threats. All we need is for you to notice and report things that seem out of place in your daily routine. By autumn of 1938, Elizabeth's network had grown to include nearly 50 individuals spread across the Windsor area. Each operated independently, reporting observations through a coded system that Elizabeth had developed with Mitchell's help. The information flowing through this network was extraordinary in both volume and quality. Elizabeth learned about suspicious strangers asking questions in local pubs, unusual activities around government facilities, and potential threats to infrastructure that official intelligence services had missed entirely. But more importantly, the network was beginning to detect patterns that suggested coordinated activities by hostile forces. Foreign agents were operating in the area, conducting what appeared to be reconnaissance for larger operations. Elizabeth compiled this intelligence into reports that she passed to Sergeant Mitchell, who had developed contacts within the official intelligence services. These reports were attributed to reliable civilian sources and were treated as valuable intelligence by professionals who had no idea they were written by a 12-year-old princess. The success of Elizabeth's intelligence operation attracted attention at the highest levels of British intelligence. By late 1938, senior officials were asking questions about the source of the remarkably accurate civilian intelligence coming from the Windsor area. Commander Browning, who was responsible for royal security, found himself in the unusual position of receiving better intelligence from unknown civilian sources than from his own professional networks. Someone in the Windsor area has developed an exceptional intelligence operation, he reported to his superiors. Whoever is running this network understands intelligence work better than most professionals. The irony was that Commander Browning was trying to identify and recruit the person who was already under his protection, the same princess he was supposed to be guarding. But Elizabeth's greatest triumph came in December 1938, when her network detected preparations for what appeared to be a coordinated attack on multiple royal residences during the Christmas season. The intelligence was fragmentary at first. Reports of unusual activities around Buckingham Palace, strange vehicles observed near Sandringham, suspicious individuals asking detailed questions about royal Christmas traditions. But when Elizabeth analyzed all the reports together, she realized they indicated a sophisticated operation involving multiple cells of attackers. Elizabeth faced a dilemma. The intelligence was too important to withhold, but revealing it would require exposing her network and potentially ending her entire operation. After consulting with Mitchell and her key instructors, Elizabeth decided to take a calculated risk. She would reveal enough information to prevent the attack, but she would do so in a way that protected her sources and maintained the secrecy of her operation. Working with Dr. Ashford, Elizabeth crafted an anonymous intelligence report that was delivered to Commander Browning through channels that made it appear to come from a highly placed source within hostile forces. The report detailed the planned Christmas attacks with enough specificity to allow security forces to disrupt them. But it was written in a way that suggested the author was a disaffected member of the attacking organization rather than an external intelligence operation. The ruse worked perfectly. Security forces successfully prevented the Christmas attacks, capturing several foreign agents and disrupting what proved to be a major espionage network. The operation was hailed as a triumph of British intelligence work. But the greatest triumph was that Elizabeth's role remained completely hidden. To the outside world, including her own parents, she was simply a remarkably mature 12-year-old who had shown exceptional courage during the previous year's kidnapping attempt. Only a handful of people knew that Princess Elizabeth had developed and operated an intelligence network that was providing better information than professional services with budgets of millions of pounds. As 1938 drew to a close, Elizabeth reflected on how much her life had changed since that October morning when she first overheard her father discussing threats against their family. In just over a year, she had transformed from a sheltered royal child into something unprecedented in British history. A future monarch who understood intelligence work, strategic planning, and unconventional warfare at a professional level. But, perhaps more importantly, she had learned that true security came not from being protected by others, but from taking responsibility for protecting those around her. The secret order she had given to Sergeant Mitchell had evolved into something far greater, a philosophy of leadership based on personal capability and direct action rather than inherited authority. This philosophy would guide Elizabeth for the rest of her life. Even as she grew older and took on more traditional royal responsibilities, she never abandoned the networks and skills she had developed as a 12-year-old. They became the foundation for a style of monarchy that was more engaged, more informed, and more effective than anything Britain had seen before. The threats that had once terrified an 11-year-old princess had been transformed into opportunities for growth and learning. By taking control of her own security, Elizabeth had discovered her true calling, not just as a royal figurehead, but as a leader who understood that the most effective way to serve her people was to be prepared to defend them personally. Years later, when historians would try to understand how Queen Elizabeth II had become such a remarkably effective and well-informed monarch, they would search in vain for the source of her extraordinary insights and capabilities. The real answer lay buried in palace archives and in the memories of a few aging servants who had once been part of something they never fully understood: the intelligence network of a 12-year-old princess who refused to be a victim. The royal secrets that began with a simple order to a young guard had grown into a legacy that would influence British security and intelligence work for decades to come. But the greatest secret of all was that the future Queen of England had learned her most important lessons not in traditional royal education, but in the shadows of Windsor Castle, from instructors who never knew they were training the most powerful woman in the British Empire.